Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, looks like I'll be having to continue the debate over the botched attempts last week by Boris Johnson to disband the Standards Committee. I've previously discussed it in terms of the abject failure of Parliament to carry out its primary role of holding the executive to account, but there is more to this story than first met the eye. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Parliament doing exactly what the Prime Minister told them to do against their own judgment and politics was politically earth-shattering. The Parliament that has held firm against executive power and excess for longer than most countries here have even existed, rolled on its back to allow the most corrupt executive of all, arguably, to tickle its belly. Actually, that might be going a bit far, but certainly the most corrupt executive in modern times. But another big line is emerging from this. Now, let's start from that fateful day last Wednesday. So much has happened since then. Owen Paterson, a Tory MP, had been found to have acted corruptly. It wasn't conjecture, and it wasn't based on hearsay or just lots of circumstantial evidence. It was all clearly documented. In fact, his corruption has been well documented for a few years. The only real surprise here is it's taken this long for the Standards Committee to find him guilty of corruption. You know, this was no one-off for Paterson. Boris Johnson gets behind a motion that doesn't just seek to vote down the verdict and the punishment, but to disband the Standards Committee altogether and replace it with one that will have an even bigger share of Tory MPs sitting on it. There are attacks on the Commissioner, all very dubious, especially as both the verdict and the punishment were approved by the committee of MPs, which included Conservative MPs. The vote is forced through, three-line whip. The BBC, the stooges in the BBC try and cover by saying it was a free vote for MPs. It was not a free vote for MPs. It was a three-line whip. In fact, it was a three-line whip and a half, because there's reports in the Financial Times that Tory MPs were threatened with having funding pulled for their constituencies if they didn't vote the right way, which is a criminal offence. So the vote is forced through. Seems an odd thing to do. Well, he's just protecting one of his own. But was he? See, Owen Paterson was in a safe Tory seat. Now, OK, it's possible that he might have faced a recall petition and would have had to fight a by-election. It's not impossible that he would have lost the by-election, but it seemed unlikely to me. So this action wasn't really doing Paterson too many favours. In the end, it's actually ended his parliamentary career. He resigned the day after the vote passed, which was supposedly designed to save him. Boris Johnson, don't worry, Owen, son, I've got your back. Next day he has to resign. With that sort of help, Boris, can you not help me, please? Boris Johnson, against a larger than anticipated public backlash, U-turned. The suspension should probably be voted on again very soon, they were saying in Parliament the next day, and they'd look again at those plans to reform the Standards Committee with a promise to obtain cross-party support for any changes now. But Johnson did not tell Paterson of this imminent U-turn. The disgraced MP learned of it, apparently, in the supermarket. Now that is odd, isn't it? On the face of it, Boris Johnson kicked the shit out of 800 years of parliamentary supremacy just to save Owen Paterson from the hassle of a by-election. Surely if he has that much regard for this man, he'd have at least let him know that the jig was up and that he was going to have to withdraw his help after all. But no, because this wasn't about Paterson, was it? This was to help Boris Johnson. And I confess to being embarrassed that I had forgotten something really quite crucial. Dominic Grieve, the former Tory MP who was one of the rebels that Boris Johnson removed the whip from before the 2019 general election, was not fooled. He immediately joined the dots together. The same commissioner who presided over the investigations into Owen Paterson is also the same one who exposed Johnson's dubious dealings over the funding of his holiday to Mystique. Needless to say, the Prime Minister was not handed a suspension for his own corruption, although admittedly this was on a lower level. But I think they are also presiding over the investigation into Boris Johnson over his flat refurbishment. I'd forgotten about that as well. It is suggested that maybe, this is speculation, but maybe Boris Johnson doesn't like where this investigation is going and saw the Paterson scandal as a chance to act. By abolishing the commission and getting rid of that pesky commissioner, seemingly motivated by a desire to protect one of his own MPs, it doesn't look half as bad or as damaging as doing it to save himself. Also consider this. If that investigation concludes that Boris Johnson is guilty of a breach of standards, make no mistake, Tory MPs will likely close ranks to protect their vote winner. But that mark of sleaze will then be on Johnson's record. It's one thing for Labour to attack Tory sleaze with a number of Conservative MPs guilty of corruption. How much more powerful will the message be if their leader is one of them? So this isn't over. And I don't mean in line with what I said yesterday when discussing the permanent stain on Parliament's record with that disgracefully craven vote on Wednesday. I mean that if this wasn't really about protecting Paterson, it doesn't end with his resignation. If this was more about nobbling the investigation into Boris Johnson, there will surely be further attempts. They've been thwarted this time. But if that was the reason for all this, the stakes are still there, they're still really high. In the meantime, the Conservatives will attempt to spread their muck around and see what sticks to the other parties. This week, former Labour MP Claudia Webb was sentenced for threatening violence against a woman. The Conservatives will point to the fact that Labour MPs have sometimes failed to meet the standards of MPs. Yes, no one is saying that the Conservatives have got a monopoly on poor behaviour. But the thing is, Labour didn't try to change the rules to get their mates off, did they? Every Labour MP who has ever been found to have breached the standards has faced the punishments. In fact, the consequences have almost always been to lose their position as an MP altogether. I don't mind them drawing attention to the fact that Tories don't have a monopoly on shit MPs, but they do have a monopoly in abusing their power to protect those shit MPs when they are exposed. Because that's really the difference, isn't it? There are corrupt people in all walks of life. Selfish people have a habit of climbing high. They have more motivation to do so than most. The difference is how they are treated by their colleagues when they are seen to have fallen from grace. The correct response is to preserve your own integrity and denounce them, or at the very least let justice take its course. Owen Paterson will no longer be an MP, but that is because he resigned. If he didn't resign, or if this had never happened, admittedly, probably the reason he's resigned is because of the furore. He now did stand a credible chance of losing any by-election. I think that's probably what's happened. If this thing hadn't blown up, he wouldn't have been exposed as he was. He'd probably have gotten away with it. He could have remained an MP, won his by-election, carried on with his ride on the gravy train for years more. Remember, this suspension doesn't mean that he had to be stopped as a paid lobbyist. He'd still be getting that salary to lobby. That wouldn't be stopped. And he's still a member of the Conservative Party. Claudia Webb is no longer a member of the Labour Party and pretty soon won't be an MP either. She has to have her appeal, of course, but if that appeal fails, and you would imagine it is because she does seem very, very guilty, then she will no longer be an MP. And that's the difference. And I don't mind at all the Conservatives trying to steer us onto that conversation. In fact, I actually noticed they're not trying to raise that conversation too loudly. So let us consider where we were. Thursday morning, the day after the vote, started off with a government minister, Kwasi Kwarteng, who by now must be really annoyed with Boris Johnson because he seems to be always the guy that goes out defending these nonsense positions. Kwasi Kwarteng attacked the commissioner, defended the moves by Tory MPs the previous day. That's what he did at breakfast interviews and so on in the morning. By lunchtime, it was all going to shit. By tea time, Paterson had resigned, the government was in full U-turn panic mode, and Downing Street once again demonstrated two things. One, Johnson's team have no idea how to judge the public mood on anything. Boris Johnson's blaming his aides over this. How did you put me in such a position? Take some responsibility, man. He's described as being a guy who's got his finger on the pulse of the public mood. Absolute nonsense. It's always been rubbish. He's very good at conning the public. He has no idea what the public think on any given thing. He just gets away with blag a lot. They have no idea how to judge the public mood. Either that or they just don't bother because they believe they can do as they please and the compliant media will smooth it all over with the plebs. Secondly, We know that Johnson himself has no backbone. He forces his MPs to nail themselves to the mast he erects, but makes sure that he can scuttle away at the first sign of public disapproval. He cares not a fig for his colleagues, even close cabinet colleagues. He will leave them all looking stupid as long as he comes up smelling of roses. If Conservative MPs are backing Johnson in the interests of a long parliamentary career, they may wish to consider that when people finally see him for what he is, and eventually they will, and that's not hope on my part, they always do, that anyone who allied themselves with him will be vilified for generations. Because it's funny how fascists, despite the weight of history, seem to think that they are the ones who will actually succeed. Yes, we know all those others failed hard and they came to sticky ends, but they didn't know what they're doing. We have a mastermind leading us in the form of Boris Johnson, who didn't realise that starving children and protecting corrupt mates would prove unpopular with the public. Is he really a mastermind? But anyway, those are my thoughts. I had imagined this case would be my final word on the fallout from this mess. There are other things to talk about, I have to say, so I'll have to portion those out over the next few days, including how relatively simple reforms might not get rid of some of this corruption. Yeah. But anyway, until then, or I suppose the upcoming by-election might be worth discussing at some point. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But until then, that's what I've got to say on that. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.